Shalom, everybody. Full house on Zoom and in the room. If there are not enough copies in the room, feel free to share. Yeah, there's still more copies. We're not there yet. Ezra, if you don't have a copy, oh, there's a bunch here. Can you pass these down? Thank you so much. Okay. So I'm a little bit in culture shock because I just got back from a silent retreat in California and a very slow-moving retreat. So here I am moving very quickly, and there's a lot of talk since I've gotten back. I walked into my house at 1 a.m. and my on Thursday night, my daughter was up, and she's like, for some reason, her energy is like really up at night, and mine is really low at night, and she's like, ah! I'm like, oh my God, where am I? Ah! So trying to integrate some of this slowness and silence into my life. It's a real challenge in New York City. But you'll see some of that, at least the silence, reflected in today's teaching. And maybe we'll move slowly. Who knows? Let's see.
Go for it.
You have to be concise and yet speak slowly. That's a challenge. All right. I think we're going to get started with the bracha. And again, Shabbat Shalom to everybody who's coming in. Barbara. Shabbos. Shabbos. Shabbat is the invitation to move slowly. But even that's a challenge, especially in this city. Okay, everybody. In unison, in cacophony, Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei
source of all life, who sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to soak in your divine wisdom. Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen. Go. Here. People see it? Excellent. Okay. It's called Approach and Avoidance, the Ambivalent Encounter with the Divine. And what I'm going to focus on today is mostly the first commandment, with some preamble to the first commandment. And the first commandment is all about God's identity, Anochi Hashem Elohecha. And we're going to sort of look at the word Anochi and look at the word Yeh-Vav-He. And once we sort of dig into that a little bit, the people and Moshe's response to the experience of divine revelation. Okay, yes, I know, the stuff of a year-long course, and we're going to do it in an hour and a little more. Okay, here we go. So we're starting with some preamble, and the preamble is, remember the people's incapacity for listening and for hearing, especially Moshe and Moshe's message about God and liberation. So it says back in Exodus 6, V'lakachti etchem li la'am, v'yiti lachem le'elohim, v'yidatem ki ani Adonai Elohechem, hamotzi etchem tachat sivlot Mitzrayim. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I, Adonai, Yeh-Vav-He, am your God who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians, right? The burdens of the Egyptians. So it's already a message of, first of all, knowing, and anyone who's studied with me in Open Book before knows that God's knowing in Exodus is really an essential feature of the whole Exodus story, and really a goal of the Exodus, right? You know, both the Israelites and the Egyptians, it is said in the Torah that God wants them to know that God is God. And it's also a message of compassion, right? I'm going to take you out from the burdens, from your suffering in Egypt, right? I, God, am the one who will do that for you. The Heve, והוצאתי אתכם אל הארץ אשר נשאתי את ידי, לתת אותה לאברהם, ליצחק ויעקב, ונתתי אותה לכם מורשה, אני אדוני. So I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession or for an inheritance. Ani Adonai, I am God. So we'll hear that again. I am God, but we're going to hear it in different language, right? We're going to shift from the Ani to the Anochi, and we're going to talk about why a little bit later. And then Vayidaber Moshe ken el bnei Israel. So Moshe heard all these words, and then Moshe spoke this way to bnei Israel, told them all this. V'lo sham'u Moshe, and they could not listen. They could not, or they would not hear Moshe. Why? Mikotza ruach ume'avoda kasha, because they had narrowed spirits or breath, and from their cruel bondage or their hard labors. Okay, so that's number one. The difficulty of hearing this liberating message and the message about God, because they were in such a small place, right? And I think we all know what it means to be in a small place and not be able to hear or take in. I know that, like, if I'm in a small place and someone tries to give me advice, I'm like, oh my God, just keep away from me, right? It's just like, I cannot, not that advice is necessarily liberating, but sometimes I can't even take, like, oh, it'll be better or it'll be okay. Like, no, it's not okay. You don't understand, right? And all I can tolerate at that moment, if I can tolerate anything in my worst moments, is someone saying, like, I hear you. Like, I hear, like, a kind of mirroring or matching where I am, right? That's the beginning for me of connection when I'm in the smallest place. Okay, so now we're going to the burning bush. And we're looking at God's introduction to Moshe. And what's interesting about the site of the burning bush is that that's also the same site, ultimately, of Sinai, right? The Sinai revelation. So Moshe, the revelation to Moshe of God, in certain ways, is mirrored later by the collective experience at Sinai of God revealing God's self to the people of Israel. So we're going to look at some of those echoes. Or here. I can move over a little. Here? Okay. Okay, so here we are at the burning bush. So here's what God says to Moshe, right? Vayomer Anochi Elohei Avicha. So Anochi. Now, no more Ani, Anochi, right? I am the God of your fathers. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And what does Moshe do immediately when Moshe hears this? Vayaster Moshe panav, ki yareh mihabeit el Elohim. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So there's the revelation of God's self, right? In the language of Anochi. And again, we'll hear more about the Anochi as we go on. And then there's the hiding, right? And there's the introduction of God's self as the God of your forefathers. Okay, and God knows, so to speak. Moshe grew up in the palace. Did he know who Abraham was? Did he know who Isaac was? Did he know who Yaakov was? Like, did this make any sense to him? So what made sense to him? Right? What part of this made sense to him? But what we do know, because we can, that in his fear and in his hiding, he must have felt the power and the intensity of God. Right? So he's having an experience, even if these words don't make sense to him. Okay. And we'll see later on, again, that word, not only Anochi, but the fear, right? The fear will be captured as well later on when God reveals God's self to the people, and the people respond with fear. Okay, so now, more about Anochi. So let's see how the conversation unfolds at the burning bush. Asher Chaim, are you here? Do you want to do a reading? Call in Asher Chaim. Maybe Asher Chaim's not.
Myself, and
So happy you're here. Lovely.
welcome back, Rav.
Deep calls to deep. Voice calls to voice.
Reading number 3.
Yes, please.
ועתה לך, ואשלחך אל פרעה, והוצא את עמי בני ישראל ממצרים. Now go, and I will send you to Paro, and bring my people, children of Israel, from Mitzrayim. ויאמר משה אל האלוהים, מי אנוכי כי אלך אל פרעה, וכי אוציא את בני ישראל ממצרים? Moshe said to Elohim, who am I, Anochi, that I should go to Paro, and that I should bring the children of Israel from Mitzrayim?
So this is really telling because God introduces God's self as Anochi earlier in verse 6. And here in verse 11, Moshe is using the same language, even though Moshe could have said Mi ani. Right? In a sense, Moshe is matching God now. Mi Anochi. Mi Anochi. Right? So Anochi Elohei Avicha. Right? I am the God of your fathers. And then Moshe is saying, but who am I? Who am I to do this?
Now that you mention it and that you bolded it, there's a foreshadowing of Paro saying, who is that God you're talking about? Who is, Moshe asks, Anochi?
Nice. Right. Who is that God? Do you remember the language of that verse?
I wish I did.
Mi Elohim, or something like that. Okay, we can look it up later. Go on.
ויאמר כי אהיה עמך, וזה לך האות, כי אנוכי שלחתיך, בהוציאך את העם ממצרים, תעבדון את האלוהים על ההר הזה. One of my favorite verses. He said, because I will be with you, and this is the sign for you that Anochi, that I sent you. When you bring out the nation from Mitzrayim, you all shall worship Elohim on this very mountain.
Great. Let's stop there for a minute. So what an amazing message, right? Because that's the other thing I think that perhaps we can tolerate in our narrowest places is someone just being with us, right? So God says, I will be with you. Ki eyemach. Wow. And this is the sign, right? Ki anochi shalachticha. That's a very strange locution because this is a sign that Anochi is sending you, right? God's talking about God in the I voice, but in the third person at the same time. It's very weird. And then there's this projection forward, right? That I will take out this nation and they will worship Ha-Elohim, right? The Elohim on this mountain, right? So where you are right now is actually a sign of hope. Where you are right now standing, terrified by this Anochi, God force, right? This, right, is going to be sort of the other side of the parentheses of where you are now, right? You can't imagine that you're going to do this, but you're going to be standing here on the other side of the experience, on the other side of Egypt, right, where God and Israel will connect and you'll be worshiping God right in this place. So what a beautiful message of hope. Okay, go on.
ויאמר משה אל האלוהים, הנה אנוכי בא אל בני ישראל, ואמרתי להם, אלוהי אבותיכם שלחני עליכם, ואמרו לי, מה שמו? מה אומר עליהם? Moshe said to Elohim, okay, Anochi, I come to the children of Israel, and I tell them, the God of your ancestors sent me to you. And they ask, yeah, what's his name? What am I going to say to them? Vayomer Elohim el Moshe, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Vayomer, ko tomar livnei Yisrael, Ehyeh shlachani aleichem. Elohim said to Moshe, I will be, as in I will be with you, Asher Eheyeh, as I will be. And he said, say this to the children of Israel, Eheyeh sent me to you.
Okay, so again, there's so much here. So first of all, Moses is saying to God, Hine, like, behold, Anochi, again, that Anochi word is coming to Israel, and they're saying, like, what's his name, right? Like, who is this God? Like, what are you talking about? And I loved Asher Chaim's sort of tone with that. Yeah, what's his name, right? And then God says to Moses something extraordinary, right? Like the strangest, most vaguest name in the world, right? I will be what I will be. What? Or I will be that I will be? What are you talking about? So I think there's a few things here. One is that because it's future directed, there's a sense that that God that is now with Moshe will be with each of you going into the future, right? That sense of I will be with is projected into the future. And this morning I learned a beautiful Hasidic understanding of this from my Chavruta Rabbi Sharon Konanisfeld, who may or may not be here. And she says that it's not only that God's giving name to the the sort of inexplicable, like, name of God, right? The uncontainable name of God with I will be that I will be, but that it's sort of pointing to future generations, that every person has to find the name of God, or the sort of the sense of God themselves. So it's sort of left open, right, for each generation, every person to seek it in the way that they will. And that inexplicable presence or force of God will be there for that person in that person's seeking, right? And in that person's ability or inability to define for themselves. Sharon, I hope I got that right. Hold on, we're not taking questions yet. We're almost there. Almost there. So one more is text, and then I'll open it up.
וידבר אלוהים את כל הדברים האלה לאמור.
Well, let's just say, so now we're at Sinai. Fast forward, right? Egypt, suffering, no listening, Pharaoh's hard-heartedness, lots of plagues, lots of death, people terrified to move through, like, leave Egypt, terrified to move through the sea, get to the wilderness, have a few experiences, sort of early experiences with God, and then finally they're at Sinai. And here's the beginning of our Parsha and the first command.
Elohim spoke all of these divarim, logos, things, items, saying, Anochi, Adonai Elohecha, asher hoseiticha me'eres Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. Anochi, I am, Yud He Vav He, your plural God. No, your singular God. Asher hoseiticha, who brought you singularly out from the land of Mitzrayim, from the house of slaves.
So finally, God's introducing God's self to the entire people, and God's using this word Anochi, right? And we're going to see some commentary about that word Anochi in a minute. But God's doing something here that God didn't do when God introduced God's self to Moshe, right? There, if we look back for a minute, Anochi Elohei Avicha. So I am the God of your fathers. And here is Anochi Yud He Vav He Elohecha. So the name of God that reflects Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh and that reflects compassion is now built into the statement. Right, the name of God that captures the interchange between Moshe and God at the bush. Right, it's not just Elohim, the aspect of judgment, but it's also the aspect of chesed, the aspect of compassion. Right, so there's so much in this relational statement, and then God says to the entire people, right, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am God your God, but who am I? Right, I am the God who based on your experience, who took you out of Egypt, the house of slaves. right? I am that. That's who I am for you and to you, right? I am that relational God. This is the history of our relationship, right? Hello. It's like, hello, I'm your mother. Hello, I'm your mother who brought you up and gave you everything so that you're alive today. Okay, so now I'm going to stop my share and quickly look at the chat. Okay, I don't see anything. Okay, going to gallery. Great. Okay, so I see a few hands in the room. I'll start in the room. Nikki, did you want to say something before?
It's a question.
Yeah.
For Eye Asher Eye, is that incorrectly translated in the King James and elsewhere as "I am what I am," or is that something different?
It is future directed, and I am that I am doesn't capture that.
Doesn't capture the future.
I wouldn't say incorrectly because it's such a
In the King
beautiful.
James, I am that I am is very different from I am what I am.
What is it?
That is different from what. Like that has more of a verb to it.
Right.
What has more of a noun to it. And I think that also implies more ongoing, whereas what can be a single moment in time.
I think it emphasizes presence as opposed to quality. I am that I am as opposed to I am what I am, which sort of refers you to like the nature of the essence of the thing.
Strictly speaking, in 17th century English syntax, I am that I am means I am because I am.
I am because I am.
And where says it in the Bible?
In the King
This
James
is very different.
translation,
This
I
is
am
still
that I
very
am.
different.
Okay,
I
are
will
people
be where I will be.
hearing this conversation on Zoom? I just want to make sure we're one room. Yes? Okay, great. Okay, so Elliot.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that God says iya, which is very vague and hard to
Right, indefinable.
indefinable,
Right.
and says I am the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, which
Yeah.
is quite definable.
Yes, very specific,
Very specific.
located in time and space.
Right. So God,
And in the past.
yes, that's
At
right.
least here in the past.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that God is saying, I am both. I am both of these. I am this indefinable essence that you're really not going to be able to, that's more of a verb. Okay. And I am also this God in history.
And as many people have pointed out, since we're talking about time and definable and indefinable, the Yud Hey Vav Hey reflects every mode of time, right? Past, future, and present. Okay, great. Okay, any more hands in the room before I go to Jay on Zoom? Jay on Zoom. Shalom.
I think in many ways this is all about name and naming. And in the transition from burning bush to Sinai, from Ehe to Yud He Vav He, it's about power. Because what is the essential human power from Adam? It's the ability to name. And here Hashem is saying, you can't name me. That's a limit to your power. And I have a different power.
Right. So I'm beyond, you want my name, you want to kind of pin me down or fix me. That's not happening here.
But it's also connected to the, I think, the primordial essential power of the human over the other animals, which is their ability to name. But now there's a greater power that cannot be named.
Beautiful. Okay, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom. I must disagree with my beloved friend. I don't think there's any negative implication here. I don't think anyone is telling anybody else that they can't call somebody something. I think it's simply Hashem saying, this is what to call me. I don't think it's circumscribing any alternatives. It's simply putting out, you can call me this, Dibarti.
Shamati. I didn't hear Jay as saying anything, that there was anything negative here. What I heard Jay say, and you can correct me, Jay, is that human beings have this capacity, but when it comes to God, that capacity is also limited. Good. Okay, I just want to hand it back to his hand.
Oh, I had it.
Oh, I saw you on screen. I was like, where? Okay. Where are they? Okay.
I just,
What's your name?
my name is Mia.
Hi, Mia.
Hi. I'm hearing this differently. I used to think it was Moses like questioning God, like, what do you want me to tell them?
Yeah.
But now I see, like, when I come to the Israelites specifically, the God of your fathers, like, he's telling them about their own God. He's like, what should I say? This is a test from the Israelites to Moses. Oh yeah, you think you know our God? What's his name?
Ooh.
And then Moses comes out like, oh, this is your God.
Ooh,
Because then the Israelites will recognize that that's who they used to know. Or
that's really interesting. And that is also interesting because, again, Moshe grew up in the palace, not as an Israelite, and he's coming to these, and it's like, who are you? What do you know about our past?
Yeah, what's the password?
What's the password? Oh, I love that interpretation. That's great. Okay.
The password.
What's the password? And what's the password? Beautiful. Okay, we're going on. Here we go. Okay, so now here's this beautiful and interesting Gemara, piece of Talmud from Shabbat 105a. And it says, so what they're doing here is they're looking at the word, so like, why the word Anochi, right? So that's where we're in the land of why Anochi right now for a few, for at least two pieces. And the Gemara says that Anochi is actually an abbreviation, a kind of acronym, No Ta Ri Kon, which is a borrowed Greek word that appears in the Gemara. And it says, so what's the acronym for? Ana nafshi kitavit yehavit. So I myself, ana nafshi, I myself wrote and gave this to you, right? Shorthand for I myself wrote and gave it. But there's another understanding, there's another way we can read that acronym, which is Ana nafshi, I, my soul, I wrote down and gave it to you. So what the Torah is actually God's gift of God's soul.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rabbi. Could you reshare your screen? It's currently blank on our end.
I see that. Okay. Reshare my screen. Thank you for telling me, Caroline. Caroline's behind the scenes holding it all together. From where are you, Caroline?
I'm currently in New York, and it's weird. It's still not sharing. That's very strange. Yeah.
See that? Let me stop the share and try again.
All else fails, feel free to send it to me, and I can share it on my screen. Yeah.
Hold on. Let's try it. Yeah, it's not coming up. Do you want to share? You have the link. Do you want to share it?
Yes, I can definitely share it. Yes. Remind me where we are, please.
Text number 5.
Number 5. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Asher. Yeah.
It takes a village. I mean, it takes a Romemu community.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, let's go to 5. Can you put OK on the cookies thing? So it, and then up above, X out the donate.
Yes. There we go.
There you go. Okay, 5. Okay, 5. We're gonna go on. We don't need the rest of 5. We're gonna go on to the next one. 6. Great. So now we're in a piece of Midrash, Tanchuma Buber it's called. And it says, and this is on the opening words of the first commandments, Anochi Hashem Elohecha, God bless you. And it says, Amar Rabbi Nehemiah, Mahu Anochi, what's Anochi? And then it says, Lashon Mitzrihu, it is Egyptian. And I tried to figure this out, and maybe someone on screen can help me or someone in the room. I think actually it's an Egyptian word, it's like not a Hebrew word. So why is God using an Egyptian word here? And also the bush. What's going on here? So what is the thing, what can we compare the thing to? So they're going to tell us a story that tells us what this is like. And this story has painful resonance for this moment. You'll see what I mean in a minute. L'melech shenishba beno. So it's compared to a king whose son was taken captive. Va'asa yamim rabim im hashpaim, and spent many, many days with his captors. Lamad sichatan shel otan hashpaim, and he learned, the language of these very captors. Hisha'asa nekama ba'oivav, v'hediu uva. Sorry, I'm getting confused here. Sha'asa nekama ba'oivav, v'hediu uva lahasiach imo bilshono. So when his father had taken vengeance on his enemies and rescued him, brought him back, he went to converse with him in his own language. And he didn't understand it. So his son lost his capacity to speak to his father in his own language because he spent so much time with his captives. Ma'asa, what did he do? He started to talk with him in the language of his captors. And that's what God did with Israel. So I actually talked about this in a sermon one night. God is kind of a hostage parent. When God's child, and God refers to the Israelites directly as a child, is in Egypt, God says, send me back my firstborn. So this is what God did with Israel. All those years that Israel was in Mitzrayim, they learned the words of the Egyptians. They learned the language of the Egyptians. So when God already redeemed them, and God came to give them the Torah, they didn't know how to listen. They didn't know how to hear. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Hareini Mesiach Imahem B'Lashon Mitzri. Behold, or I will talk to them in the language of the Egyptians, or in the Egyptian language. Anoch, or Anochi. Adam shehu mevakesh lomar l'chaverav b'Mitzrayim ani. So when a person in Egypt wants to say to his friend, I, hu omer Anoch, he say Anoch. Kach patach HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Lshonam v'amar Anochi. And that's how God opened up the conversation and said Anochi instead of Ani. So God understood who God was talking to, and God understood how to speak, like in the language of Israel, was just like God's vulnerable, traumatized people. How do you speak to them in a language that they understand? Okay. All right. Any comments on this before I go forward? So again, it's really the Anochi in that case is the language of compassion and the language of understanding who you're speaking to. Okay, Roberta.
Shabbat shalom and welcome back.
Thank you. If we could stop the share for a minute, Caroline. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that beautiful drash about Anochi being an Egyptian word. That's kind of mind-blowing. And I've been since you started with Ayeh, Asher Ayeh, I've been thinking, so what is it that I can touch or step into that brings me out of Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim of the moment and the next moment and the next moment, and just taking it through what you just shared about Anochi being Egyptian. It's an Egyptian word that we can find sustenance. We can find God, whatever name you want to call it, redemption in the next breath, in the next laugh of a grandchild, in the next beautiful tree out the window. That to not get it's really like a deep renunciation of idol worship, to not think that that what brings us out of Egypt has to look or sound or speak a certain language or a certain way. I mean, it's just really beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you, Roberta. Yeah, and Yud Hey Vav Hey and Asher is so full of breath. So I love that you said that. Thank you. Asher Chaim?
Lowered my hand. Thank you.
Really? Why? I was so excited. Done? Okay, if you want to work it in, I'll ask you to read the next two pieces. If you want to work it in, you can. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm just thinking it slightly differently based on family background. When I think of what happens in captivity, often to gain control of a population, you do not allow them to speak their mother tongue. They're only allowed to speak the language of the country because that's one way to control them.
That's one way
to control them. And to me, it just gives it more significance when I think about captivity and liberation to then.
But what is the Israelites' own language at this point? They've been in Egypt.
I would assume that it isn't just that they
something years.
But they may not have simply lost it. They may never have been allowed to speak it in captivity. And so I don't know. Somehow, just thinking of this as an Egyptian word, just for me emphasizes the fact that liberation can mean something far more than just simply physical liberation. And returning to one's mother tongue is. We haven't had to experience that, but in a it's hard to imagine what that's like to never to be cut off from your mother tongue, but then regain it.
Yes. Thank you for adding that poignancy. Okay, Tomas, Jen, Jesse.
So it may be very anachronistic because reading history into these texts is only one strategy, but
well, the rabbis say that the Torah there's no past and future. Oh. It's timeless. So whatever you say becomes Torah. It's part of the Torah.
Well, now I better sit up straight. No, in pre-literate societies, without documentations and IDs and seals and signatures and passports, a lot of your authority had to do with your ability to participate in formulaic greetings. So when you met someone, it was almost like a little bit like a password. Like even a stranger or whatever, like you had to know the drill of there was a very, very standard way. And even goodbye or hello, they derive weird ways from these very formulaic and quite intricate greetings, some of which I think we see when the matriarchs and patriarchs run across each other. But the reason I thought of it is if you go to the Metropolitan Museum and you read the beautiful scroll of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is basically an instruction manual for how to be dead, like after you die, like what happens next, and what's the drill in the afterworld. And the first thing that happens after you die is a mysterious figure greets you, who's called the hypnopomp, which is a lovely word. This person is the kind of first god that you're likely ever to meet personally, if you're not, some elevated figure. And it's a fairly minor god, but this is the god who kind of guides you to have your soul judged and various other things. So he's your kind of, onboarding god to the afterlife. But anyway, the very first passages of the Egyptian Book of the Dead is explaining the ritual greeting. And how this god is going to introduce himself and what you should say in return. And so you can imagine this mapping onto this, okay, well, I'm your god, and I'm saying it in a particular way, and So anyway, just this almost liturgy of formulaic greetings.
Right, and you can see that in the play at the Burning Bush, like Moshe and God say Anochi, 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 like that back and forth. Kind of mirroring of that very specific word.
I love that about mirroring.
Okay, Jen, and then Jesse.
I just wanted to respond to what you were saying about I think that's something like we haven't lost the language that we're recapturing, and it just made me think about in Israel that we have just over the last less than 100 years. There were choices to make when Israel was founded about do we speak Yiddish, do we speak Hebrew, do we speak something else, and the choice.
And how thrilling that experience was for them.
Well, the choice was to speak Hebrew and actually almost banish Yiddish, which in my mind was another mother tongue. Yeah, for a while. And we can also reflect on, American Jews' general inability to speak Hebrew, right? We've lost that mother tongue. Yeah. Okay, Jesse, and then I see a couple of hands on the screen, and then I will return to the source sheet. Yeah, Jesse.
Yeah, so the discussion is making me think of what you said in the very beginning, that when you're feeling very unhappy in a very narrow place, right, you can't hear freedom, right? You can only hear if somebody meets you where you are, right? And so God is meeting the people where they are.
Yeah.
And it's only...
There's someone who's not muted on screen. Caroline, can you help us with that?
Wait, sorry, what's up? Yes.
There's strange sounds coming from the screen that should be muted.
Yes, let me check.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's sort of like you're hearing the voice of freedom, but it's just irritating, right? Because you need the person to just meet you where you are, and to really find your voice, right? You need that, like, speak in my voice, speak, I'm unhappy, give me the empathy, and then I can hear the word of freedom. Then I can find my voice. Then I can.
Then maybe you can hear the word of freedom.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, hopefully. Like,
hopefully.
The empathy helps you to
start
be
with the
open
empathy.
to hear. Now I can get out of it, but I can't get out of it if you're not going to meet me where I am.
And how hard it is, just to name how hard it is to hear the pain of the other. So we go to advice so we don't have to actually be with them in their pain.
Yeah. Or we, just don't know how, or don't know that that's what the person needs.
Okay, so now there's two people online. What?
But God knows.
But God knows. But God knows. Amy, and then Richard. Yes, I know not you spoke Yiddish, Barbara. I'm just teasing you because, yes, as a Syrian,
I was, thinking about Spanish Jews and, the whole.
Absolutely. I brought up Yiddish because it was specifically a language in the land of Israel, and that sort of whole sort of Eastern European way of existence was sort of, that kind of persona was sort of in exile. That's why I named that specific language. But yes, you're absolutely right. Okay, Amy and then Richard.
Good morning. I wanted to say that when as Americans, we conquered America, we took Native Americans out of their culture and beat them if they spoke their native language. And yet, ironically, it was the Navajo language that helped us to win World War II. Because of the Navajo speakers, the Nazis couldn't translate it. There was no way to translate.
The return of the repressed. That's amazing.
Exactly.
Tragic and.
I also wanted to say Moses would have known Hebrew because the guys up in Goshen probably maintained a separate society, so they would have retained the Hebrew that they brought into the country. Moses knew he was a Hebrew because the first the introduction we have when he's 17 is he goes to save his brethren, so he knows he's a Hebrew, and also the general population would have known some Hebrew because they divided up into tribes. And how would they know which tribe they were in if they didn't have retained some of that identity of their original Hebrew? And when God gave us the Torah, he gave it to us in Hebrew. So we would have had to know some Hebrew, at least. I don't think they beat it out of us completely.
Absolutely makes sense. And I think the Midrash is raising the question, like, what language were they most comfortable with? What would be familiar and welcome to them at that moment? Thank you, Amy.
Yeah,
Richard,
but may I say one last thing? In the yeshivas, as you know, in Israel, they teach them English, Hebrew, and Yiddish.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, Richard.
Good morning, Diane. This discussion about names is really interesting. You've talked a lot about names, both at these sessions and in Beit Midrash over the years, how important they are as a way for each of us to identify ourselves. not just our language, but our souls. And that's one of the reasons, going back to it's not really a name.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a statement of time,
yes.
of perhaps eternity, and asks each of us to absorb the concept that whatever spirituality we have, it's not a name, it's a spiritual concept. And all this business about naming is a very human endeavor that, in a sense, the word Anochi or Anoch in Egyptian is a way of an eternal spiritual force to try to speak to people who don't yet, if they ever will, understand the nature of spirituality. So it's very interesting that the God in this storyline, in a sense, doesn't want to speak a language that doesn't that gives he wants to speak a language that gives a name to himself in order to be able to speak to people who demand that, when in an ideal world perhaps they wouldn't.
Beautiful, really beautiful. Thank you, Richard, for articulating that so well. Okay, we're going to go on, and then Daniel, I'll get to you later. I'm going to go on and do some text, and then you'll be first on deck. Okay. So Caroline, if you can share again. And Asher Chaim, I'm going to ask you to read the two pieces from the Rambam, 7 and 8. So this is from Maimonides, mostly 12th century Spain and Egypt.
Vidiat davar ze mitzvat aseh. Acknowledgement of.
I don't see the number 6. Wait. Oh, no, it's good. Sorry. I'm sorry, Caroline. I got confused for a second. Number 7 on the screen. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, go again, Asher Chaim.
Vidiat davar ze mitzvat aseh. Acknowledgement of this thing, item, logos, is a positive commandment. Proof text, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God.
Let me just say one thing about this. So there's a question, like, how is I am Adonai, your God, a commandment? Like, what's going on here? What's the command? So Rambam is responding to that question.
וכל המעלה על דעתו שיש שם אלוה אחר, חוץ מזה, עובר בלא תעשה. And whoever has it on his mind that there is another God other than this violates a negative precept. Proof text, Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. You shall have no other gods before me. V'chofer be'ikar, and denies the foundational truth. Shezehu ha'ikar ha'gadol shehakol talui bo. This is the foundational principle. Everything else depends on it.
Beautiful. So I am Adonai, your God, right? Who's taking you out of Egypt, is the foundational principle. And from that statement, the rest of the Torah emerges. Right? This is God's identity statement. This is God's I statement. When the Israelites were in Egypt, right, the Kabbalists say two things. Dibur begalut, voice, God's voice was in exile, and also da'at, consciousness itself was in exile. And here, right, we're being commanded with consciousness. Know God, right? Listen to God's statement about who God is, because everything else in the Torah depends on it. Okay, so this is going to be expanded in a little while. Asher Chaim, I can't take people who have already spoken. I'm sorry, thank you. Next piece from the Rambam, and then we're going to read a piece in English from Gershom Sholem.
Vida. Again, knowing, knowledge, acknowledgement. I like the acknowledge. Shezah kol, gam kein ein madragatam bo shaveh im madragat Moshe Rabbeinu.
We're in 8, sorry.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. I was talking to Caroline, yeah.
Acknowledge. This is the voice. But note well that their level of understanding was not on the same level as Moshe Rabbeinu.
So this was the voice. The 10 Commandments were said in the voice, the divine voice of God. But the way Moshe received that is not the way the people received that, because Moshe wasn't on a different level. And this also recalls a midrash I was talking to with my chavruta this morning about, Rabbi Sharon, that the midrash says that every person at Sinai heard the voice according to their own capacity, right? So each person there heard it in their own way. And the proof text is that the language of Revelation is in kolot, hakolot, right? It's in the plural, the voices, not just the voice. So Moshe's capacity was much greater than the people. Okay, so now we're going to build on these two pieces in the next piece, which is Gershom Shalom. And I'm going to invite, go ahead, Asha.
Also, Elohecha is speaking to an individual, not to y'all. So it's many voices, each of them speaking to a particular thou.
Yes, absolutely. Each person there in time and space. And it is said by the tradition that we were all standing at Sinai, right? So Sinai is an event located in time and space, and it's not an event located in time and space.
It's a nice inversion, because you'd assume it would be one voice talking to many, but actually it's many
voices talking to many.
One.
Speaking to each one.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, now, this piece from Gershom Shalom is a piece from that was published in Commentary in 1964, which reflects on the Anochi and takes it in a slightly different direction, but builds on the last two pieces of interpretation we just looked at. So who would like to read that in the room, English in a loud voice?
What number are we on?
What
number are we on?
We're on 10, and Jeffrey will read.
This conception of Moses as interpreter of the divine voice for the people was developed much more radically by Maimonides, whose ideas Rabbi Mendel of Raimanov carried to their ultimate conclusion.
So Mendel of Raimanov, Hasidic thinker, who, it says below, I think 19th century, is that correct?
In Rabbi Mendel's view, not even the first two commandments were revealed directly to the whole people of Israel. All that Israel heard was the Aleph, with which in the Hebrew text the first commandment begins, the Aleph of the word Anochi, I. This strikes me as a highly remarkable statement. In Hebrew, the consonant Aleph represents nothing more than the position taken by the larynx when a word begins with a vowel. Thus, the Aleph may be said to denote the source of all articulate sound, and indeed the Kabbalists always regarded it as the spiritual root of all the other letters, encompassing in its essence the whole alphabet, and hence all other elements of human discourse. To hear the Aleph is to hear next to nothing. It is the preparation for all audible language, but in itself conveys no determinate specific meaning. With his daring statement that the actual revelation to Israel consisted only of the Aleph, then Rabbi Mendel transformed the revelation on Mount Sinai into a mystical revelation, pregnant with infinite meaning, but without specific meaning. In order to become a foundation of religious authority, it had to be translated into human language, and that is what Moses did. In this light, every statement on which authority is grounded has become a human interpretation, however valid and exalted, of something that transcends it. Once in history, a mystical experience was imparted to a whole nation and formed a bond between that nation and God. But the truly divine element in this revelation, the immense Aleph, was not in itself sufficient to express the divine message. And in itself, it was more than the community could bear. Only the prophet was empowered to communicate the meaning of this inarticulate voice to the community. It is mystical experience which conceives and gives birth to authority.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to stop the share for a minute because that was a lot. And you know, it's so interesting because this Aleph, right, which is sort of the silence before sound and before language, takes me back to a conversation we had in Open Book a few weeks ago about how the Israelites, before they had language, were just crying out and groaning and moaning, right? I remember, Tomas, specifically, I forget exactly what your phrase was, but it's like, it's sound before signification.
That's right. Sound of person.
Is that what you said? Oh, good, I remember.
Your memory is better than mine.
For what you said. Clearly became Torah for me. Okay, so Daniel's been waiting. So that was a lot. But it reflects expression before signification. Beautiful. But it says so much about the Anochi and starting with the Aleph and sort of the power of that silence before signification. And if we combine that with, the empathy of God, that Anochi holds so much, right? It's like that ability to connect with the people through which they can hear and not hear all at once, and which underlies all of Torah, and which Moshe can hear more of as the mystic that he was and the prophet that he was. Okay, I'm missing a lot in the chat, but I'm just gonna be present for the moment and listen to Daniel.
Good Shabbos. So this has been a really beautiful teaching about Anochi, Yud-He, Vav-He, and the resonance that Jewish spirituality has with the divine name Yud-He, Vav-He, with the qualities of awareness, presence, intimacy. When Yud-He, Vav-He says to Moses, "I will be with you," it's a personal, intimate encounter. And what I'm just thinking about is the way in which myself, as a contemporary Jew and spiritual seeker, in my way of speaking about the divine, I usually don't use Yud-He, Vav-He or Hashem. The other divine name is Elohim. And it just seems like we've internalized a name for the divine in English, God, that really misses all of the nuances that we're talking about today as far as Yud-He, Vav-He, connoting awareness, presence, intimacy, connection, silence, the place of our own divine self. And I wish for myself and for contemporary Jews that we could actually use these gorgeous names for the divine that we've inherited.
Daniel, that's so beautiful. And I feel like, in a way, what you're saying is like the manifestation of I am or I will be what I will be. Because the way that God is landing for you, right, at this moment in time in history, sorry, ambulance is going by. I don't know if you can hear them on Zoom. Takes me back to the early days of COVID, just for a moment. But is such an, these are unfolding notions of God, right? We hear God in very specific ways in our own time and our own culture, at this very moment. And each generation, right? Each generation, each person, each culture hears that word God in such different ways. And I love what you're saying about like, what names of God can we use that carries like the resonance and the layers and the complexity. And that's why I took us back at the beginning to the conversation at the Bush, because there you could really feel like the notions of God just unfolding in that conversation, right? In ways that to sort of help Moshe grapple with what is this presence I'm encountering, right? What language can I use to describe this experience? How can I bring this back to the people? And again, this is resonant for me because, I was just people heard at the beginning, I was just at a silent retreat, or mostly silent retreat for 4 days. And one of the leaders said at the end, when people ask you what it was like, just say, "Oh, great," because you really can't describe this experience. Which may or may not be true. But it's interesting, like what can you bring back, right? Of even, of our own individual experience to one another. We each have individual, what words can we use to say, like, who am I? Okay, we're gonna go on. We are let's see. We are, what? Oh, there's a hand, oh, I'm sorry, Rob, I missed you, go ahead.
We speak sometimes about stories of the Torah.
Yeah.
And allegory.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
This kind of defines an experience between God and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we as a group don't speak about that enough, because it's not like God spoke to Moses and Moses told a couple of guys and then they ate some bagels.
It's a massive revelation.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't studied other religions.
It wasn't just open book one morning, right?
Well, something like that, but I haven't studied other religions, but I can't think of one that had a group experience, both coming out of Egypt and the revelation at Sinai, like the Jewish people. And yes, it's wonderful stories and wonderful things, but something really big happened. And it was passed down for years.
And it also points to the essential nature of Judaism as a communitarian religion, right? We don't end up by ourselves in a room meditating. We may for a while, but we need to come back and share, right, what we've learned, which may or may not be different than other traditions. I won't say that it is or isn't, but essentially, like, Judaism is lived in community. Okay, now, next one, because this is really important. So now we are looking at how do the people respond to this revelation, right? They hear these, what we call now the Ten Commandments, and what happens, right? What are they feeling? And these are the people who, remember, we began with this at the beginning, right, who couldn't tolerate like knowledge of God or contact with God or message of liberation. And now they finally had this experience of revelation, and here's what they saw and felt. Okay, Asher Chaim, can I roll it back to you?
וכל העם רואים את הקולות ואת הלפידים ואת קול השופר ואת ההר עשן Vayar ha'am vayanu'u. All of the nation saw the thunder and the lightning and the sound of the shofar and the mountain billowing smoke. And the people saw and stood back, quivered, vayanu'u, whatever that means.
They trembled, like they were shaking, right? And they stood or they fell back.
I'm sorry, it continues, vayamdu merachok, and they stood at a distance.
Yeah. And there's this weird language for they saw the voices, or even they saw the thunder, right? It's kind of an experience of synesthesia, or perhaps even trauma itself. Quick.
Why is kolot translated as thunder? Why wouldn't it be translated as God's voices? Like
it could be, but here they kind of took it more.
Kolot in plural rather than the voice.
Yeah.
No, kolot in this verse is plural, which may be why they wanted to sound the sounds of thunder plural, rather than the mystical many voices one.
Right, but it could be either. Right, or it's the thunder, the sounds of thunder that were part of the revelation.
Barak is not.
Barak is also a word for thunder as well. So I think you're right. I think, well, I'm not looking at concordance right now, but I would say I would go towards voices. Okay, next, let's go on, Asher.
ויאמרו אל משה, דבר אתה עמנו ונשמע. ואל ידבר עמנו Elohim pen namut. And they said to Moshe, you speak with us, and we will shma. Hear, listen, obey. But let not Elohim speak with us, lest we die. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am, al tira'u.
Hold on, Asher Chaim, 1 second. So they say, you speak to us, and we'll hear. And if God, because we don't want God to speak to us, because we're going to die. They felt like they were going to die. But also note that this is a pivotal moment in the Torah, because God speaks to the whole at this moment, right? Or God just spoke to the whole people. And God never speaks to them directly again, but God speaks to them through Moshe from now on. So God actually listens to his poor, frightened child. And sort of God, in response to them standing back, stands back. Okay, go on, Asher Chaim.
Vayomer Moshe el ha'am al tira, Moshe said to the people, do not be afraid. Ki leva'avur nasot etchem ba ha'elohim. Elohim came to test you. Uva'avur tiheh yir'ato al penechem levilti tehatahu. It's a good thing for you to be terrified. It inoculates you against sin. Vayamod ha'am merachok. Umoshe nigash el ha'arafel asher sham ha'elohim. Nevertheless, the people stood back, and Moshe approached the deep, thick gloom where Elohim was.
So, in other words, God needed to give God's people an experience of God, right? Like feeling that presence of God to understand what is this all about, right? There's some powerful intensity that animates this whole project, and you just felt it. And now I understand you can't feel it anymore, but you'll get it through Moshe. Okay, let's go on. So the people stand back and Moshe approaches. Note that, right? I call this whole thing approach and avoidance of divine power. So the people stand back and Moshe approaches, and let's see a couple of comments on Moshe approaching. So, you know what, I'm just going to sum this one up. So because it says Moshe Nigash, and it's in the nif'al, it's in the passive verse, a passive form of the grammar, the Midrash of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says that the angels, Michael and Gabriel, actually took him by his two arms and brought him over to the Shekhinah, to the divine presence, and it was against his will. So Moshe himself is being dragged to face God. But there's another understanding from Nachman of Bratslav, number 14. Let's go down a little bit. Caroline, thank you. So here it says, so this is really interesting. So the people stand at a distance and Moshe approaches. And the people, Nachman of Bratslav, is saying that see an obstacle and they stand back. But Moshe sees this obstacle, this arafel, which Nachman of Bratslav is reterming a kind of obstacle, and sort of goes close, right, entering the mist where God was. So Moshe's going, I'm just going to read it in English for now, in other words, into the obstacle which is precisely where God is hidden. So you know how we all have challenges in our life? And I don't know about you, but I often respond with avoidance because I think somehow they'll go away if I do that. But it doesn't seem to work. But Moshe, but here it's saying that if you go into the obstacle, you'll actually find God right there in the obstacle, right? By going in, by approaching, by not standing back. And then finally it says, Hashem yitbarach ba'atzmo mastir et atzmo b'toch hamini'ah. That God's self, right, hides God's self in the obstacle. And remember when Moshe first saw God, right, at the bush, vayaster et panav, he hid his face. And now what is hidden is God in the obstacle, in the challenge itself. Okay, next source. Okay, so this is a poem that I wanted to conclude with. But before I do, I just want to say again how beautiful it is to think about, this approach avoidance, which makes sense given the fear.